Hello and welcome. My name is John Hoyt, and this is the TMC webinar series. In this webinar, we're going to talk about getting the most out of the Dynamics 365 Business Central system. In this particular webinar, what I really wanted to focus on was the larger components of the Dynamics 365 Business Central system as a whole. In the sales process, when I'm doing demos for people, we get very focused on features and on functionality, really trying to meet the specific needs and requirements of that organization, both at that moment and what we all agree as kind of their future direction, where they're heading. But that very specific focus on that required feature set and that functionality to meet those specific objectives and requirements for that company doesn't often give me a chance to kind of step back and go, okay, when you license Dynamics 365 Business Central, what does that really entail? What's everything that's kind of possible? And so for today's presentation, that's what I wanted to focus on and talk about what's included in the product, just as part of your basic subscription license inside Business Central. What are all the different features and modules that are available? And we'll go through those. And then what's available? What can you add on? How can you extend? What else can you do with Dynamics 365 Business Central as your core? So kind of the hub and spoke approach, with the hub being Business Central. What can I use to connect it to? And speaking of that, I should point out up in the top left-hand corner, Microsoft has finally agreed upon a logo for the system. It's supposed to represent the connectivity between Business Central and that larger ecosystem, whether that's Microsoft products from the Office Suite or Power BI, something like that, or through things like Power Apps and the ability to get in some fashion your customers and your vendors to be connected into your Business Central system, at least in terms of some visibility. And we'll go through that. I will spend a little bit of time in the product talking about some of the new features. Obviously, one of the changes that have occurred with the Business Central product is Microsoft switches to a model of doing incremental updates as often as they feel like it, essentially. So new features and new functions can get introduced from the Microsoft end on a regular basis, and I wanted to touch on a couple of those. And then what's next? Well, that's really kind of discussion that you can have internally and talk about what else can we do. We've got our basic system in place. We've replaced QuickBooks, for example. What are we going to do next? And so that's what I wanted to give you some background and some information on today. As always, the PowerPoint presentation will be available. Just send an email to Jim Kaltsis and he can give you a copy of the deck. I'll also reference a couple of documents like the licensing guide, and that's available. We can send that along to you as well. To start, Microsoft always gives us a roadmap of where we are and where we're going. And at this point, we're in the transition really between kind of the old product delivery model and what will be the new product delivery model going forward. So in the spring of 2008, when Dynamics 365 Business Central for the cloud version got launched, that was really under the skin a stripped down or a restricted feature set of the Dynamics NAV product. And the Dynamics NAV product at that point continued as its own standalone product series in the traditional delivery on-premise with your own data center, etc. In the fall of 2008, they have essentially changed the name of the NAV product, and it will now be known as Dynamics 365 Business Central on-premise. Same delivery, same licensing, same feature set. And of course, the online product, the cloud product, will continue with its subscription-only model, but underneath the skin, they are now essentially the exact same products. And then going forward in the future, there's a couple of changes that Microsoft likes to talk about in terms of new proficiency and improvements, some new features that get released. A lot of that can come from customer feedback. So if you have suggestions or ideas for how the product could be improved, you can submit those to the customer sourced website. They can be reviewed and voted upon by other members of the community. And if you get enough votes, you make it to the top of the list. That's where Microsoft looks for their next development projects. On the on-premise version, down at the bottom half there for 2019 through 2022, they're really kind of moving entirely off of the old technology, the old seaside architecture that NAV has used historically, and bringing it in line with what's being done all right now in Business Central Cloud in the subscription model. CDS plus data plus intelligence. CDS is the common data service. This is the toolkit that Microsoft has established to allow either a consulting group like TMC or an independent software vendor writing an industry-specific solution, or potentially even an end user client, to be able to work with Business Central on a system-to-system integration basis, making sure you're following all the accounting rules and business logic that Business Central would enforce upon a user. Essentially, if you can do it with the keyboard and mouse on the client, there is a way through the common data services model to allow you to do that same task or that same activity remotely. Data and intelligence, that would relate to things like the increased or enhanced use of Power BI inside the system for reporting, the use of the Cortana intelligence service to allow us to analyze data or perform other tasks inside the system. So this is all kind of what's coming. This is part of that what's next view. In terms of what's currently available, when you sign up for Business Central, you're getting all of the modules that you see on this slide and the following two slides. There's so many different features called out, I couldn't put it onto a single slide without turning it into an eye chart for everyone. I won't bother going through all of these. Again, I'm going to make all of this available as a download from Just Ask Jim. He'll send you a copy of it. But when we did your initial implementation, or if you're considering doing your initial implementation with us now as a prospect, you will not be implementing all of this. You're going to be implementing a very targeted set of these features and functions to get your system up and running, and with the focus on those initial needs and requirements. But once that process kind of ends, then you have a chance to step back and say, okay, what else could we do? For example, under the financial management section, over on the column on the right-hand side, deferrals may not have been implemented initially, but this allows us to set up a way to better handle in a more efficient manner those payables or those receivables that have a long lifespan for some reason. Payable for insurance, for example, I really should defer the recognition of that expense. And rather than doing that as a bunch of manual journal entries each month, you can just set up the deferral template, apply that template at the time you process the vendor's invoice, and the process takes over from there and does the deferral automatically. Again, I'm not going to go through all of these. I'll let you do that at your leisure when you've got more time. But as you can see, there is a wealth of features available inside this. One editorial little quibble at this point: why this page is titled Project Management, I'm not really clear, because to be honest, this is mostly focused on purchasing, sales, inventory management, etc. The project piece is really only represented in a couple of areas like jobs and tasks and estimates and so forth. At any rate, that's how Microsoft chose to label this, so fine, I won't argue too much. But this is really everything that goes beyond the core financials. You'll even see things here like basic receivables and basic payables get lumped in down here. So that previous page, the general ledger and so forth, now we get more into the transactional level. And if I come down to the final page, we can bring in things like human resources, warehouse management. And in the other section across the bottom, a couple of things that I want to point out that not everyone really does initially. The embedded Power BI function. As part of your Office 365 license, you may already have Power BI, or Power BI would be available as an add-on, but that's Microsoft's analytics and graphing tool to allow you to work with the Business Central data. You can then take those same reports, dashboards, worksheets, etc., out of Power BI and embed them directly into your Business Central client, which makes that information and that way of viewing the data available to whichever client people want to work with. Some extended text for my items if I want to build out my product catalog. And then in the very bottom right, customer objects for extensions and customizations. This is a specific set of tables within the database that allows someone like TMC or an outside developer to create customizations, which we now call extensions, to build in specific functionality for you. That fact that it's isolated in a specific range of objects dedicated to you, the customer, means that it goes through an upgrade process without any changes or impacts anywhere else. So Microsoft can continue to add features and functions, the customizations that we've built for you. Those aren't going to have any impacts. You won't lose any functionality, and it won't negatively impact anything else inside the system. So those 3 pages are all included in the base, what we call the Essentials license. There's also a step up called the Premium license, and that entitles you to everything in Essentials. But in addition, you also now get the service functionality to do field service work on material that you've either manufactured using the manufacturing capability or material that you've supplied through your sales module. So if you're sending anybody out to do maintenance work, repair work, updates, etc., you want to track their time, track their use of parts, manage returns processing, etc. All that's going to be part of the service order management. And the manufacturing capabilities on the discrete side of manufacturing are now pretty much fully enabled inside Business Central. Microsoft is still staying away from process manufacturing, anything that does formulas, blends, recipes, mixing, yields, batches, things like that. Microsoft will do with an outside partner. But for discrete manufacturing, turning eaches into eaches, then we're going to offer full functionality. There is a lot of confusion, and part of this is Microsoft's fault. Part of this is perhaps TMC's fault. Perhaps it's just sort of circumstances for the changing world that we're living in. But license types, there's quite a bit of confusion over what is available. The basic user is a full user, and a full user can be licensed for either a Essentials system or a Premium system. So the 2 system types are both available with a full user license. I should point out here, because Microsoft doesn't always make this clear as well, once you move one user on your system to a premium level, that is, they need the service capabilities or the manufacturing capabilities, everybody on the system will have to be a premium user. I cannot mix and match between Essential and Premium. It's all of one or all of the other. But the full user are those internal employees that are going to really interact with the system in a both deep and broad fashion. That is, all the read and write functionality. In the past, we've called them things like pro users or power users, but where their capability inside the system is limited only by the security role that they've been assigned. And then what Microsoft is now calling the additional users have in the past been called things like light users or self-service users. Even further down in this document, they'll refer to them as team members. But these are people that will interact with the Business Central system, but in a less deep and less broad way than a full user. And I'll go through some specifics about that. But what I really want to call attention to there is the line that says consume data or reports. The read-only function is available throughout the Business Central, again, limited only by your security choices in terms of what they can access. But they can read all the lists, all the reports, see the details in fact boxes, etc. And they have a couple of tasks that they can accomplish. And I have a more expansive list of that in just a couple of slides. But the tasks that they can complete are very specific, and there is no gray areas. There is no way to add just one more piece to it. If their needs for interacting with the system go beyond what is already defined, they have to step up to a full user. And so to just kind of encapsulate that, your full users can be either Essentials or Premium, but it's all of one or all of the other. No way to mix and match on the full users. And for the team members, those are the additional people that have lighter needs, lighter responsibilities somewhere inside the system. Team members. This is the official verbiage, and I won't bother reading all of that. Again, there's a lot of text to simply read through, but I did want to call out a couple of key sentences here. The team member license, again, read access as well as some write access for a very select set of tasks. The piece about within a given tenant, that simply means that within your license you have one tenant. That tenant is a portion of the database server, essentially. Within your tenant, you can have multiple companies. The team member then can have access to a single company in that tenant, or he could have access to multiple companies inside that tenant. The key piece being that the email address and his license subscription will tie him to that tenant. And then again, just kind of repeating that, whether your overall system is licensed for Essentials or licensed for Premium does not change what the team member can do. They get the same access inside both of those systems. The third piece that I want to point out on that wall of text, though, is in the second paragraph, and that's about Power Apps. Power Apps is a system-to-system tool that Microsoft makes available through a separate licensing, and it allows for an external user of some type to have an interaction with the Dynamics 365 Business Central system. That is, the capability going through a Power App will go above and beyond what a team member could do, or what someone like one of your customers could access, or what one of your vendors could access. I don't want to turn this into a deep discussion around Power Apps. That's an entirely lengthier and detailed conversation. I simply want to point out that as part of your basic 365 Business Central licensing, your ability to start to do things like create and work with Power Apps is part of that license. Okay, so for the team members specifically, this is the current official wording from Microsoft as of November. And even here, I find an area where they should have been more specific. But basically, again, that read-only, anything that is a report or a list or a dashboard or something, you can give people access to. They can consume as much information as they want. They can update existing master records. Cannot create a new customer, but they can update an existing customer. So think about somebody in a customer service position, and customer calls and says, I need to change my shipping address. That's an update to an existing record that does not have an impact on the accounting records. Fine, we can let a team member make that change. Same thing would be true through a vendor or through an item. But they cannot create new records. That would require a full user. The workflow approvals inside the Business Central system, and we'll talk a little bit about more when we get into the product itself, because I want to show you all the different things that are available in that world essentially. But they can approve or reject tasks. Team members do not initiate workflows. That comes from a full member, full user license. But once a full user has kicked off a process that requires a workflow approval, a team member can be part of that approval process where they can either approve or reject within that workflow. They can create, edit, or delete a missing word here in my view, sales quote. So again, think about somebody in that customer service role. When the customer calls in to request a change on the shipping address, The team member could also initiate a sales quote. To be clear, they cannot initiate a sales order. They cannot do anything on a sales invoice, but they can create a new quote, and then that quote could be submitted through a workflow approval process, and it goes to the sales rep assigned to the customer or to the sales manager or somebody else. Well, again, what's missing there? Sales. It should be in that line. Create, edit, delete personal information. That is their own personal information. Human resources module is part of the basic license, so users or team members have access to go in and change things like their home address, their home telephone number. There's some other information that they could initiate a change, things like adding a dependent, but that would require a final approval from somebody in the HR module, because that record have an impact inside the system. If you're using our jobs function, which is a way to create and assign tasks and track time against that activity, and eventually convert that activity into some type of billable invoice, a 30-second synopsis of the jobs module, team members can enter timesheet information against that. Cannot create jobs, cannot assign inventory items to the jobs, can't post invoices out of the jobs module, etc. But they can go in on a daily or weekly basis and say, today I worked on this job, this many hours at this task, submit my time against that. And then, of course, we talked about Power Apps as well, and that would be part of their capabilities. A couple of things that have been added that don't really get, I think, highlighted most frequently enough. Power BI and Cortana Intelligence are both embedded now in Dynamics 365 Business Central, but by default, they're not really enabled or set up. So this is something that you may want to circle back with our consulting team and say, hey, these are powers that we'd like to start to take advantage of. Again, Power BI requires a separate license, but that is usually done through your Office 365 licensing. And if you've got questions about any of those licensing kind of details, contact Jim. We can walk you through the specifics of those. But once you have Power BI set up and connected to your Business Central data, now I can start to bring all of that power out of the Power BI world and embed it directly as a visual with all the drill down capabilities, etc., additional filtering, whatever you have, inside Business Central client proper. So I can use the power of Power BI without ever leaving the Business Central client. Again, that's all part of the system. We just need to get that enabled for you. And then the Cortana Intelligence initially came about in Power BI, where you could do things like pull up your sales history and say, show me all of my sales to customers in this zip code range, and let Power BI and Cortana go dig through everything and find what looked interesting based on those couple of keywords. That power gets further distributed into the Business Central client, where we can now work and do those kind of what if questions, show me how questions, analyze my data questions, using the power of artificial intelligence directly inside the Business Central world. Again, the full kind of licensing details around Power Apps, and I won't go into all of this. Again, it's a separate discussion. Trying to illustrate, though, that that is a capability. And as you think about where you're going in the future with your Business Central-based system, I want you to start to think a little bit about the Power Apps capabilities and things like, my customers ask me for the ability to look at their current balance and receivables, what's their open invoices, etc. So in the past, we might have done something like that through a web portal system where they'd have to log on to a web portal. Now we can build that same type of exposure of data, the ability again to read only out of the system, and do that through something like a Power App. So vendor wants to know when was the last time a check was issued to them out of Business Central. We can build that capability out of a Power App. With that also is part of a tool called Microsoft Flow, which is basically a free-form way to build a process or to build a workflow. we can give you more information about those offline. When you get the PowerPoint from me, both of these links should be active and should allow you to go out and go directly to the Microsoft pages where you can learn more about those capabilities. Using something like Power Apps then and Microsoft Flow is what allows us to start to bring the external users into the larger environment that Business Central can offer. So on the right-hand side, we have the internal users. Those are your full user licenses. Those are your team member licenses. Those are the people that really get up close and hands-on with Business Central. And then using tools like Power Apps and Microsoft Flow, we can kind of bring in those external users, customers and suppliers that need information from the system or in some light capability may need to interact with the system. Vendor might be able to submit an invoice, for example, or at least kick off that process. They don't need to have a subscription license to Business Central. They simply do that as a Power App user from the external side. And again, the full verbiage on external users out of the current licensing guide, who these people are. Again, my goal, start a conversation. If you have questions, want to see more details, just reach out to Jim and we can arrange that for you. But to reinforce that idea of connectivity within the Business Central application, who all we can work with. A quick visual, not everyone is always aware, but for Business Central, Microsoft makes available not only the web browser client that you've seen me use and we'll take a look at in a little bit here today in the webinar, but there are also tablet clients and smartphone clients available. So for anybody who's either a full user currently or is a team member or someone you're considering extending that out to, I just want to point out that this is a tool that's available on the platform of your choice, the device of your choice, as long as you have internet connectivity and a reasonably recent smartphone, tablet, desktop, laptop, whatever it might be, you can get access to the Dynamics 365 Business Central system. So access whenever and wherever people might need that. I want to talk briefly about AppSource, and we'll take a look at that in a little bit when we get into the product itself. But this is how Microsoft has decided to standardize the delivery of solutions created by their independent software vendor partners. In the past, an independent software vendor would write an extension or an add-on to the Dynamics, at that time, NAV system, and they would then license that and sell that and market that themselves. And while Microsoft had a program that was called Certified for Microsoft Dynamics, and that was essentially Microsoft taking the ISV's solution and rigorously testing it internally at Microsoft to make sure that it didn't interfere or cause any problems with the core NAV product that it was based upon, and that Microsoft was reasonably confident that it was going to be, a solid solution. Once it had passed Microsoft's testing, it got the CFMD stamp of approval, and we kind of used that as a badge of honor. If you really were serious about writing a third-party product to work with NAV, you'd submit it to Microsoft and get it certified. Okay, and now in the Business Central world, that's the only way it works. The ISVs have taken their products, they have written specific versions for Business Central to extend feature set functionality, connectivity to external systems, whatever it might be. Microsoft reviews it and approves it and then publishes it on AppSource, where the end user, customers and clients such as yourselves, you can now go and you can see the products that are available and you can subscribe to them directly through AppSource. So maybe you want an extension to do connections to your FedEx or UPS shipper, or credit card processing, or sales tax calculation from Avalara, whatever it might be. They're all up and available on AppSource. And then a couple things within the product itself that I wanted to show real quickly today. They've enhanced the search functionality inside the product. So instead of looking solely for a form or a list inside, we'll now look for how-to articles or documentation, whatever it might be. The lists, whether it's a list of items or customers or GL accounts, anything inside the BC, they've improved the ability to filter within those lists so you can get more specific in what you're looking for. The ability to update lists in and out of Excel. And I'll give you an example of that. We've talked about workflows and approvals. Again, I want to show you the list of kind of everything that's available there. And then there are a lot in the manual and assisted setups, things that may not have been done initially because we were focused on those initial set of requirements. But this is where I can enable things like having Outlook client be able to view my Business Central data. And I just want to give you a show of where those are and what types of things are available. So with that, let me pause for just a second and I'll go grab my desktop. Okay, so close PowerPoint for a moment. Let me go ahead and launch into Dynamics 365 Business Central. And of course, we do that by starting with my Office sign-in, and then from Office over to Dynamics 365 Business Central. So coming to the home page, of course, the search function is the little light bulb. And in the initial release, we only had the ability to look for the name of the form or the name of the window. What we've done now is expand out that search. So when I put in a word or part of a word or part of a phrase, in addition to the links that allow me to go directly to the pages or the tasks that would use that, and in this case there are 41 that include sale in some point, there's also going to be directly to whatever page I'm focused on. So on the current page with the business manager role, there are 4 different options with the word sale somewhere inside those. I get links to take me directly to all the reports and analytic tools that would use that value. And the new feature, the documentation. Anywhere inside the Microsoft Business Central documentation where that word shows up, and then a link to go do that. So the basic search function is still in place, still accessed with the same icon, but now a far more meaningful and richer set of results will be available when you start to search inside that function. And it talked about in the list views, so in this case I'll just drill down to my chart of accounts. We still have the filter function, but this has now expanded to give me more options. So I can filter by all, or now start to add in as many specific filters as I want to create. And then as I add in specific filters, I want to know where the name includes something like account. These filters can now get saved, they can get reused, so I can build kind of a library inside each one of the lists that I might have of different ways of viewing that same information. So now when I come into the chart of accounts, I can have one view that's based upon my balance sheet, one that's based upon my P&L. I don't have to scroll, filter, etc. And again, those filters will be persistent. You can number them, continue to use them over and over. And if I take that same list view and I move it out to Excel, again, because the Excel is part of my Office 365 functionality, and enable editing will be available for me. Over on the right-hand side, when I'm inside Excel now, I'm going to get should first ask me to either log in, who I am, or it should load it for me automatically. But I'll get the tools and the controls that allow me to work with this list of values coming out of Dynamics 365 Business Central. And if I make changes to that, allow me to publish those back in. The publish function between Excel and Business Central is restricted in a couple of ways. It's going to need to start with a list of somethings coming out of Business Central. So think about master records, vendors, customers, items, the chart of accounts itself or something. And then the amount or the type of information that can be changed has to be non-posted. I can't work with historic information. I also don't have the ability to bring in details like create a sales transaction document in Excel and bring it in. Give me a second. Let me try to relaunch that. And it will be clear when you get the list out into Excel. There we go. So I was waiting for it was a sign-in page. The publish function will be grayed out if the list you're working with is protected in some way by Business Central. But in this case, when I'm dealing with something like my chart of accounts, I get not only all of the columns that I saw inside Business Central, but when I want to edit it in Excel, it'll bring out all the columns that it really knows about for that particular list, whatever it might be. And then I could go through here, make the changes that I need to make, and once I was done, I simply click Publish, and I can now push this information back into Business Central, and the edits that I've made here in Excel will be updated in the Business Central records directly. So that ability to update your lists out of Excel, and again, that's going to be for master records or in-process transactions where you're not going to be making some type of invalid or unapproved change, whatever those might be. I wanted to talk about the different workflows that are available, because this is a great way to now start to go through and automate what today might be a manual process, but it's key for making sure that you maintain control. You're able to recognize who approved something. Workflows allows me to make that a more formal process with all the documentation and steps being controlled inside Business Central. That would also then provide a audit trail to be able to go back after the fact and identify who created, who approved, who finalized, etc. And I can include, Jim, if you don't mind, make a note. I've also got a document that details all of these in one large document. But out of the box, there are about 28, I believe, predefined workflow templates broken down into a variety of activities or modules. And all these need to we need to configure them based upon your users. So anybody that has access through Azure Active Directory, an email account that's been set up, we can make them part of the approval process. And again, the team member license allows people to be part of an approver, although they can't originate any of these. So purchase documents, sales and marketing, all the way down through returns. So again, this can frequently get overlooked during the initial implementation. It just doesn't survive for a variety of reasons in terms of being something that gets worked on immediately. Simply wanted to call your attention and focus to them and talk about the benefits you might gain from having what is today, again, an informal process turned into a true workflow inside the Business Central system, and get better control of the activities, get better auditing for who's doing the work, etc. And then the last thing that I wanted to talk about inside the product directly, let me get back to my home page. When you're logged in the Business Manager role, as I am, you'll get access to the Setup and Extensions tab. And this is where the initial configurations were done to get your Business Central system up and running. That might have been done through something like an assisted setup. And these are a set of step-by-step wizards that will allow you to set up and configure features and functionality inside the system. And you can see that I have a number here that are not yet done, but it includes things like some of the basic workflows that we just took a look at. If you wanted to use the item approval workflow, I can simply click on the assisted setup here, and it'll start to take me through a little step-by-step wizard. I go through and answer each one of the questions, so which one of my users is going to be the approver, etc. When I got to the end of this process, and I won't complete this now, I'd have that workflow approval set up and ready to go. And now all of my new items changes on whichever values I wanted to track are done for you. Those are the assisted setups. Those are going to be done with kind of a manual step-by-step process through that wizard. And then there are some other kind of more manual setups. These I would, again, get some advice from your consulting or your project manager. These are not wizard driven, but they are key to getting the system set up properly. And again, they may not have been gone through initially. From that Setup and Extensions tab also, service connections allow the Business Central product to work with external service or external data providers. And you can see I've got a couple enabled. The bank data conversion setup has been done, so I could do multi-currency data, exchange rate updates, etc. But I have a number that have not yet been done. OCR is one that I want to point out. It is possible to set up your Business Central system so that inbound documents you're receiving, a vendor invoice, for example, can be submitted through an OCR service, and the OCR service will do their best to convert that image of the vendor's invoice into your payables transaction. It's just part of the services that are available and can be enabled inside the Business Central system. But again, we don't always get a chance to talk about them during the sales process and don't always get a chance to talk about them during the implementations either. And then finally, under the extensions, these are all the extensions that I have currently enabled inside my system. These are pieces or modules or features, whatever it might be, that I have enabled out of AppSource. So things like the bank feeds, that's what I'm using to get current exchange rates for my multi-currency. I've got PayPal enabled so that I can process PayPal as a payment source inside, reports, data migration, etc. All of that is coming out of the AppSource. To access the AppSource, I'm going to return to my Office 365 homepage. I want to click on the add-in, and this takes me into AppSource. And the first things I want to do are set filters. I want to look only for Dynamics 365. I only want to look for Business Central. And at the moment, there are 176 reviewed and certified, ready to be subscribed to offerings inside Dynamics 365 Business Central. Now I could use the categories here and refine that even more closely. If I wanted to look in operations and supply chain management, there are 49 of those. You can see the reviews, the approvals. Most of these will offer a free trial if it's not a free product altogether. But you might want to take a look at things like sales and inventory forecasting. So go above and beyond the sales forecast that you can build as a sales budget, essentially inside Business Central, and go more detailed, or perhaps work with that inside Excel, etc. I won't go any deeper into AppSource at this point. Again, my focus was simply to give you a little bit of an exposure to say, you've made the right first step, you've got Business Central implemented, or you're going to have it implemented soon. I wanted you to be aware that there's a whole lot more that we can now add to that experience and add to that environment, and how you can get some exposure to those. That brings me to the end of today's webinar. I wanted to thank everyone very much for their time and attention. I hope this has been helpful. If you'd like to get a copy of this slide deck or the licensing guide or the workflow document, etc., just reach out to Jim Kaltzis here at TMC, and he'd be happy to send those documents along to you. And with that, thank you very much, everyone, and we will see you in 2019 for our next TMC webinar.